So yeah, I'm really glad we have folks like Don and Clara here working on this integration, and folks on my product team. It's pretty complex, but it's very valuable. WEEC was founded in 2001, so we're 16 years old. Our founding team came out of PG&E and Sempra and utilities on the West Coast. We were one of the first cloud-based companies. Way back then, we actually had a server farm or server closet before everyone went to Amazon. So we've been doing this a long time and learned a lot of interesting lessons, and that's why Clara invited us. And we're excited to be here because what we're doing is once you get this data, our system helps people actually make it actionable. And so that's been our mission for 16 years. Get the data and actually do something with it and drive savings. So we have, there's roughly 5 million commercial buildings in the U.S., and we talk to a lot of them, and still a tremendous amount are using bills to manage their energy expense. And like Clara and others have mentioned, there's obviously no granularity in a bill. It's once a month. It's typically delivered weeks after the fact, and there's significant lapses and lags in terms until you see it. What's also hard to interpret is there's lots of different tiers, and so I know some of the gentlemen are familiar with tariffs, and so there's different demand charges and different tiers, mid-peak and off-peak and on-peak. It's pretty complex. And so again, what our software does is take this data and try to make it actionable. And smart meters help do that. So as Clara mentioned, there's millions and millions of smart meters out there now. These solve a lot of those problems. Even if there are 15-minute intervals, that goes from 1 data point per month to 3,000. So it's significant. And if it's more frequent intervals, it's thousands, even more data points. So there's also faster access. You can go online and see what happened. You're not waiting for a bill to be mailed to you or emailed to you. So it's huge progress for all of us, frankly. However, what we found, and this was borne out, I was just at a customer recently, they have AMI data now, and they showed me their website. They said, this is great and everything, but what are we supposed to do with this? They basically had access to 15-minute interval data, and they could only look at 1 week at a time. And so they said, we're not sure how we've operated this week versus other weeks. Is this good? Is this bad? Again, what are we supposed to do with this? And that's, again, where companies like WEEC, and there's others out there that certainly that do what we do. So taking that granularity and making it actionable. And so we've been a customer-driven company. Our first customers were out in Northern California 15 years ago, and then that led us to the East Coast. We have buildings in Atlanta as well, and we'll talk more about that. We've had to learn a lot of lessons over time, and sometimes it's the hard way. We had to learn them. The first thing, and I don't want to, this cannot be underestimated, just getting this data acquisition is a huge hurdle for people. So folks like Don and others giving access to buildings for 50 million meters is huge. We're still struggling with that. We are a Green Button Connect partner. We've developed over 100 importers for other utilities that maybe aren't Green Button at this point, and for BMS data and many others. So you have to be able to get the data in a number of different ways. We've also developed systems where you can get the data if maybe they don't have Green Button or they want it in real time, where you can grab it using data recorders and pulse outputs and things like that. You have to have a full suite to get that data to make it actionable. What we found early on was that, again, once you get this data, how does this compare to how I've operated in the past? Is this good? Is this bad? Am I consistent? Am I inconsistent? So we've developed a lot of algorithms to help show people that in an easy-to-use visualization. So we normalize for different weather patterns, for sun load, for day type, and a number of other different factors. We just signed 30 Rockefeller in New York City, and they're going to put a display in their engineering room so they can see very quickly and easily both their steam and electric consumption, how they're operating in real time versus their previous patterns. This gives them a target to shoot for, so they can start to improve things. And it also shows them immediately if they're in or out of the money, so to speak, so they can make changes. Again, you have to have a baseline to compare it to. One thing I'll note is 30 Rockefeller is a very large building. They're spending millions in energy every year, but not everyone has the resources to get a big display in their engineering room. So making sure that it's accessible online is pretty important. And we have a mobile app, and that actually drives a lot of the engagement. People are really busy. There's a lack of personnel in a lot of these buildings, and so making sure you're sending people actionable alerts is probably more key, because people aren't sitting around looking at your screen all day. They need information pushed to them. So once you have the baseline, another natural question that comes up is, okay, we have access to this data, we have an analytics platform, really, how much can we save, and what can we do? And so we've developed something called initiatives, and so we have almost 500 million square feet on our system. We use those profiles to develop best practices, and those can be regional and size-based and segment-based. And so we can use that to compare it to someone's existing operations and say, hey, based on this baseline, you can save $25,000, and here's the 6 ways to do it. That enables people, again, to start making changes. A lot of times people may say, well, you've identified 6 opportunities, but 3 I can't do because of my equipment, because of my tenant base, et cetera. And so those are all opt-in, and then our system can then track it over time. One thing, and Clara mentioned this, is because our team came out of the utility industry, we knew very early on that just looking at the data itself is not as useful as it could be. You need a robust tariff engine to apply dollars to it. Particularly, and this is a room of energy experts, but particularly as you talk to building level personnel, what drives them the most is dollars. And so converting these initiatives, these 4 initiatives are worth $25,000. Let's prioritize which ones we can approach first and how we can save money. That's the best way to get adoption, is what we've found. So typically what we've done is focused on operational changes, because a lot of folks have, again, small budgets. They're not putting displays up in their engineering room. Operational changes, things you can do without no and low cost changes. What a lot of folks are doing now, particularly as utility rebates are getting richer, they want to look at capital projects. And so using a lot of those building blocks, the baselining, the initiatives, the tariff engine, enables people to apply these same analytics to do measurement verification. What we found after talking to customer after customer was there's a couple of use cases that came up a lot. One is doing what-if analysis, so taking the smart meter data from Green Button, or maybe it's from a data recorder, looking at the baselines, and then applying what you think this project would do. And there's a lot of engineers here, and you know what these projects could do, incorporating rebates, and frankly, hoping to get more projects approved. What we also found was a lot of folks had challenges in terms of just getting the data, time in the day, is tracking those projects. And so we have, over time, we can actually automatically track those projects based on what the baseline was, what your estimate was, and again, using that tariff engine over time. Any questions on some of these analytics? Sure.
You just mentioned tariff engine. Laura mentioned there are so many different tariffs out there. How big is your database of tariff engines?
Yeah, so we're a national company, so we have about 350 that we maintain. And so we have a full-time team that keeps track of these.
Any guess of how many there are?
I mean, we're in almost all major markets, but there's, I would guess, does anyone know?
You've got over 4,000 actual utilities, electric utilities in the United States. Some of them have multiple tariffs, even for the same customer. So you're talking literally thousands of different tariffs.
Yeah, I would believe that.
Yeah, at least, safe to say at least 20,000 different tariffs. Very safe to say.
Yeah, so we're in like New York, Texas, California, Georgia, and yeah, there's multiple tariffs in each of these markets, and so we've had to build systems to. Of course, we're signing buildings all the time that are in places where we don't have tariffs. So you have to have a pretty robust process to get these updated. And these, I mean, it's a full-time job. These guys basically look every month to see which tariffs have changed and to update those. I just saw some LADWP tariff updates that we're sending around to customers, and that I'm sure I'm sure everyone's really happy to see because it was an increase, of course. Typically increases. Good question. Any other questions?
Does Mark provide that information to the customer, or do you actually help analyze and provide some recommendations based on what you're seeing?
Yeah. So we have a client services team that gets on the phone with the client and can help talk about demand management strategies and equipment strategies. One thing where we've always stopped so far is our strategy has been not to reach into controlling the building, because what we've found is a lot of building teams are just not ready for that. And it's obviously, there's companies that do that, of course. It's just adds a layer of complexity. We've always just wanted to provide low-cost analytics to help people make quick paybacks.
One quick question. The bottom line I see down there is 6 to 18% energy savings. Is that dollars or BTUs or kilowatt hours or what?
Yeah, so that's actually, that comes from a mission data study that aggregated 17 other studies. And that's consumption.
It's kWh, not dollars.
Yeah, that's consumption. But what we typically have seen is somewhere around that range, probably more like 6 to 12% in dollars for portfolios. And I want to make sure it's a portfolio, because every building is different. Maybe some buildings are already running pretty tightly, and others might be more than that. But yeah, the dollar piece is huge, and our customers have always demanded dollar looks. And so what we also do is we normalize all those dollar looks for tariff changes. If a tariff changes, we normalize for that, for weather, for occupancy, because you might have a supposed great year on your budget, and maybe it was just not as hot as it's been in previous years. And so normalizing for that actually pinpoints buildings that are making real changes, normalized for their previous operations. So yeah, who benefits from this? Clearly owners do. Building teams, the savings can be used for other projects, or giving tenants parties and things like that, things that will help the relationship. What we've also found increasingly is utilities are starting to look at customer engagement strategies, taking this data and providing other services. And then ESCOs and contractors, and we'll hear more about this from Jim, who's going to focus. I'm focusing more on commercial. Jim's going to focus on industrial, but increasing recurring revenue, increasing conversations you can have with your client, using this kind of data, have more conversations with your client, not just showing up when it's time for a new deal to be negotiated. The one thing I'd like to echo is, I think that's how Clara and I got together, is through Mission Data. We're a member of this consortium. There's about 40 companies that are, and I can't speak highly enough of it. It's a great resource, missiondata.org. There's all sorts of resources out there on their site. And if in New Jersey, there might even be some information about New Jersey's AMI program, if there is one. And so if you're having issues wondering, is this utility going to AMI and when, or what's the holdup, they might be a good resource. And you can maybe stick them on the utility. They're fairly effective too. So that was more of the mock part of the presentation. I just had a couple comments. We saw this. I think Clara talked about this. 90 million smart meters expected by 2020. What's interesting about this is I think these projections are probably fairly accurate because there's real benefits to the utilities to doing this. It's not what we're talking about. It's really more about their own business. You know, smart meters can help them prevent energy theft. It can help with power outage notifications. It can help with customer engagement. Also, it helps them become a hub with DERs. And so there's a ton of reasons for utilities to roll these out. And this only helps all of us so that we can use that data once it becomes available.
No more estimated readings.
Yeah,
That's a big one.
no, that's right.
No more estimated bills.
Yeah, I wasn't sure how many folks, or my team wasn't sure how many folks would come from the West Coast, but we wanted to bring back some of the news. In terms of meter-based data, California has passed legislation mandating meter-based data for M&V and for pay for performance. It's fairly challenging to interpret. People are still interpreting it, and it's evolving. But it is part of a couple of assembly bills, AB 802, which is for commercial buildings, and AB 793, which is for small and medium-sized businesses and residential. And it was a specific part of the mandate to start using this meter-based data for measurement verification. And so there's a couple of RFPs out there now for utilities that are being forced to comply for pay for performance by the end of the year. And so they're doing some, I think you may be part of this, Jim, some industrial pay for performance mandates using meter data. And so they're going to go out and find customers. They're going to find vendors that are going to go out there and find industrial customers that are willing to reduce consumption and get paid, 10 cents a kWh, whatever the structure might be, and then share it most likely with the vendor. So that stuff's already happening, and it's part of these relatively slow-moving mandates. These mandates were actually passed in 2015, and they're still being rolled out and interpreted, actually. So I'll end. The last, the requisite case study we put together, we've got buildings all over the country, but we put together a case study for an Atlanta-based owner. They've pretty sophisticated owner of office. They're spending $20 million a year in energy, and we're in the majority of their portfolio. What's interesting about this is they've been on our system a few years. They've had access to interval data for a lot longer. Like I said, they're pretty sophisticated. And so about a year ago, they started to use these initiatives that I was talking about and adopting these initiatives. And so the software identified over $1 million in potential initiatives. Sometimes these initiatives, you can discount them or say, hey, maybe this doesn't make sense. But they ended up adopting about 800,000 and are well on their way to completing most of those. What's interesting about this is these folks have had access to data for a long time, but they needed something to identify these opportunities and track it. And also they've run a great program and managed it very well. And so the typical user that's still using their bill, having the smart meter data, there's a ton of opportunity for them once they get that data and can start to interpret it with your help and maybe ours or other folks' help. So hopefully Michael doesn't care if we give intros, but if you want an intro to mission data, you can reach us there. Or if you have any questions for me, that'll get to me, and appreciate the time.